Okay, I think we are ready to start. Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon from a bit rainy Bratislava. Welcome to our online discussion event. My name is Zuzana Gabrižová. I'm the editor-in-chief of Euractiv Slovakia. This event is organized by Europolicy in cooperation with the Prague office of the Heinrich Böll Stiftung. And we would like to welcome those of you who are following us here on Zoom platform. Those of you will also have the opportunity to ask questions if you wish via the chat option here in Zoom. And yeah, we are also streaming online on Euractiv Slovakia and also on social media. So we are also available for wider audiences. We have titled today's debate, Slovakia and the New Leaders of the West. Well, by those leaders, for the purpose of this debate, we primarily mean Donald Trump, the president of the USA, and Friedrich Merz, the new German chancellor. But more broadly, we want to discuss more or less evident changes in the making that affect Europe and of course also Slovakia within Europe. But now I would like to welcome our speakers, our guests from Brussels. We have Mr. Roderick Kefferpütz, Director of the Heinrich Böll Stiftung European Union Office. Hello.
Thanks for having me.
With us is also connecting from Berlin, Milan Nič, Senior Research Fellow at the German Council on Foreign Relations, Center for Order and Governance. Welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me. Dobrý deň, domov na Slovensko.
And last but not least, from Bratislava is joining us Ms. Miroslava Pisklová, Research Fellow from Slovak Foreign Policy Association. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Firstly, before we start, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Adela Jurečková, Director of the Prague office of Heinrich Böll Stiftung.
Dobré odpoledne. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this event also in the name of the Prague office of the Heinrich Böll Foundation. In our work focusing on Czech Republic, Slovakia and Hungary, we are trying on the one hand to highlight the role of these countries in European debates, and on the other to create space for discussions about EU and foreign policy in Central and Eastern Europe. And today's topic is such an example. In Slovakia, many are asking how the new presidency of Donald Trump will influence the future of Europe, but also what impact the change of government in Germany will have on Slovak-German relations and possibly also on Slovakia's future actions within the EU. How these issues are intertwined shows the very recent statement of Chancellor Friedrich Merz. According to Merz, the EU should withdraw funding from Slovakia and Hungary if they continued to take stances and decisions that are not in line with EU policy, for example, towards Russia. So far, Slovakia has been more cautious and less offensive when it comes to blocking the voting on important EU policies, for example, on the support for Ukraine, compared with Orbán's government in Hungary. On the other hand, some of Prime Minister Robert Fico's actions, such as his trip to Russia, where he met President Putin, are unprecedented and leaving many Europeans very concerned. The further EU and foreign political course of Slovakia does not seem to be easily predictable for many in Europe and will not only be crucial for the country itself, but plays an important role also for the whole of Europe and, of course, including Germany. That is why I am happy that we are meeting today in order to better understand and discuss the current dynamics between Bratislava, Berlin, Brussels, and Washington. And I'm glad that my dear colleague from the Heinrich Böll Foundation, the director of our Brussels EU office, Roderick Kefferpütz, is here with us today. With him, but also Milan Nič from DGAP and Miroslava Pisklová from the Slovak Foreign Policy Association, we have three very, very knowledgeable people to provide us with more insight into these dynamics. Last but not least, I would like to thank Europolicy and Euractiv Slovakia for organizing this event and for our long and very fruitful cooperation. And I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you indeed. We are very happy to be able to host such discussions, as I think they're quite important one, as we live in a times of changes in the making, and it's always difficult, I mean, to see clearly what is happening while you're in the middle of the change. Also, we didn't know at the time of the planning of this debate it will fall just 2 days before the historic first meeting between Donald Trump and Friedrich Merz. They are supposed to be discussing Ukraine, Middle East, and trade, and also these days the peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia have started in Istanbul. So a lot of is happening these days. Not to also mention the result of Polish elections, presidential elections that come to mind, where the candidate that was very assertively, should I say, promoted by the current US administration, narrowly won the presidency. So let's jump right to the debate, and let me maybe just start a little bit more broadly with some kind of broader diagnosis of the current dynamics. We have a full-scale imperial war still raging very closely to our borders. And the transatlantic partnership that we relied on for so long here in Europe is basically over, at least in the form that we have been taking for granted for so long. So the first question, I guess, would be for you, do we really need to reconsider the entire post Second World War order as we knew it? And if so, if the situation indeed is so grave or is so pressing, what we have seen so far in with our political leadership, and by our political leadership I mean the European one, is it adequate? So is this the same question to all of you to jumpstart? And I would like to ask maybe Roderick to start, if you don't mind.
Great, thanks, Susanna. Thank you for having me again. If we look back over the last 80 years, I would say there were two orders in Europe. There was the post-World War II order that you rightly referred to, but there was also the post-Berlin Wall order. The first order, obviously marred by the Cold War, and the second order, I think, brought in Europe a kind of logic or idea that the arc of history was always bending towards more freedom, more democracy, more prosperity, security, and open, liberal societies. But what both of these orders actually had in common was that Europe was a ground for other actors to be present. So take the Cold War, of course, you had the United States and you had the Soviet Union. Europe was one of the main battlegrounds or competition grounds. And the second order, the post-Berlin Wall order, that's obviously changed that dynamic. But at the same time, we were still dependent on a lot of other actors. We outsourced our energy security to Russia. We outsourced our military security and defense to the United States, and we outsourced our economic prosperity basically to the large Chinese market. And this is all now coming to the head. With the 24th of February 2022, Russia's illegal aggression and invasion of Ukraine, we suddenly have this order being blown up to smithereens. And have we been able to erect a new order? No, we are in an interregnum period where a new order is in the making. It's up to us to decide how this order is. Now, have the policies, you asked, have the policies been up to date and up to scratch? Have they been adequate? And I'm afraid they have not been. There has been a lot of naivety, and we have closed our eyes to a lot of the aggression that we've seen from Russia beforehand. Aggression from Russia vis-a-vis Georgia in 2008, or Crimea 2014, hybrid attacks, assassinations in Berlin, in the UK, in other countries. And still, Europe tried to engage with Russia, be it with Nord Stream 2 or with other energy deals. So I think there was a lot of naivety. And what's happening now with the new Trump 2.0 administration is that this second pillar, this pillar of relying on the American security umbrella, is also falling apart, falling away. And so it's time for Europe, for the EU, to grow up and stand on its own 2 feet. And I think Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said it very well at her Charlemagne Prize speech last weekend. And I'd actually like to quote a sentence that she said here. She said, "I believe that our next great era, the next great unifying project, is about building an independent Europe." And I think that's what it's about now. And Europe has come too late. The EU has come too late with a lot of policies, but that doesn't mean it's all been bad. We've been able to wean ourselves off Russian energy. If 5 years ago you would have told me we will use the European Peace Facility to finance weapons and arms for Ukraine, I wouldn't have believed it. We now have the Safe Rearm Europe initiative. Countries are aiming to spend more on their defense. So the instruments are coming into place, but they are all reactive. What we would need now is more proactive instruments to actually shape this new European order that will be emerging soon.
Thank you. Milanic, how big of a change are we living?
Well, it is a big change. We are in the middle of a big change, and some of the tectonic shifts have started before Trump, before the war, Russian war in Ukraine. People are pointing to 2008-9, the start of a global financial crisis as the beginning of something. And the shifts you can describe, as Roderick did. You see a diffusing power and influence away from the West, away from the center. So you have one shift from the West more to the East, but also from North to the South. And it's not only about China or Russia, it's also about India. It's also about all of a sudden, a better bargaining position of mid-sized powers like Turkey. So this is one trend, one shift. Another trend would be demographic or technology. This kind of digital world that we are living in, which, by the way, some of the non-Western powers like China have mastered very well in their surveillance state. But I think what's important for us, Europeans and Central Europeans, is that we see multilateralism in retreat, we see free trade in retreat, and we also see a huge sort of pressures on Europe. We also see war near Europe, near us, and complete sort of it's about the organizing principles of Europe. If one power attacks another one and then demands new borders, this is something that was defended in former Yugoslavia. No border has changed. So let me maybe close on something which I think it's fundamental for us. So on top of these tectonic shifts in the global order, we have the second administration of Donald Trump, which is a disruptor in international relations, and also the U.S. withdrawal from European security will now happen. It's not a question if, it's when. And the expectation is it will happen more rapidly. So it's Europe more in charge of its own security with Putin's Russia as it is, and Europe without a strong deterrence against Russia, and sometime few years to build that. And secondly, this is a shift of the world into spheres of influence, where one thing that Donald Trump, Xi, and Vladimir Putin share is conviction that great powers should be left to organize their own neighborhoods. Where is Europe in this? Will Europe be able to have its own sphere of influence in its neighborhood, starting with Ukraine, continuing with the Balkans and the Mediterranean? or it will become only some kind of a junior partner in the US sphere, which is weakening, and where in the world which Trump wants to have it a la carte. Will also European Union be a la carte, as some of internal players would prefer it, Europe of strong nation states or sovereign nations and so on. So this is where I think we are discussing what is happening in these weeks with how the Slovak government of Robert Fico and the very difficult and fragile ruling coalition is trying to navigate its place.
Thank you. Miroslava, the same question to you, and maybe do you feel like there is an understanding among Slovak politicians, be in coalition or in opposition, of these profound changes that we are living and the urgency that it brings with it?
Thank you. Yes, just to reflect on what the previous speakers were talking about, I definitely agree that we need to reconsider the post-World War II order to a great extent, but we don't need to start from scratch, from zero. The world order that we have been living in the past decades has been based on really wanting to ensure a peaceful environment where we can rely and call for multilateral order, for strong international institutions, and also for some kind of economic interdependence, which will all prevent another war, great war on our continent. However, as we see, we have right now a raging war in Ukraine, just next to our borders or behind our borders, and we cannot expect that this is some kind of a status quo for the upcoming years, because we know that several security services in Europe have already issued a warning that maybe in a time of within 5 years, we can expect Russia to try our limits and try our capacity to react on European and explicitly on NATO soil. So we need to definitely be aware of that threat. Concerning the transatlantic relationship that is significantly weakened very quickly under the second Trump presidency, we can, of course, no more rely also on support from their side concerning European security and defense. We should have been thinking about this much sooner, but thankfully this is some kind of a last call for Europe to really do what it can concerning its securing its defense capacities and do its homework pretty much. We have been oblivious to Macron's call for strategic autonomy in security and defense since 2017, so this is really the time to act. And to respond to your second question, focusing more on the willingness or the preparedness of Slovak politicians to be part of the solution, I would say even the coalition partners, or at least the leading party Smer and also Party Hlas, Voice, are well aware of the threats that are surrounding us, of the changing global order, of the rising powers, and of course also of the security threat that is coming from Russia. So is the case also from the opposition side, and especially the leading opposition parties. These days, the issue is that the coalition parties right now and the government is somehow not looking at these threats significantly enough to incorporate them into their vision of so-called sovereign foreign policy, focusing on all the 4 cardinal directions, and they are not really prioritizing our own security interests at the moment.
Thank you. Now maybe I would like to try to understand a little bit more the nature of the rift that we are now living between Europe and United States. Is it more, in your view, recalibration of roles, or is it something much more like politically adversarial? And by politically adversarial, I mean, given the outright support that the Trump administration is giving to the right-wing political forces in Europe, and almost deliberately trying to oust the political mainstream from power in Europe capitals. So I guess the question is, isn't the US itself a little bit of a threat to Europe? Roderick.
Yeah, difficult question. I would argue that it's a recalibration. There are elements of a threat, and we have to see how far they go and how much they continue to go. The United States has traditionally been a promoter and protector of European liberal democracy, European security, and European prosperity. And we actually see all three now being put into doubt. Put into doubt prosperity because of the tariffs that Trump is threatening on Europe, security because Trump might cut a deal with Russia over our heads and over the head of Ukraine, because he might no longer back Article 5 or be part of NATO down the line, and a threat to liberal democracy because we've heard the speeches from J.D. Vance at the Munich security conferences. We've heard the day before the presidential election in Poland, the US administration basically calling on Polish voters to vote for Nawrocki and not for the other liberal candidate. I was at the Dahrendorf Forum a couple of weeks ago, and the foreign policy thinker Robert Kagan, the one who coined the term Americans are from Mars, Europeans are from Venus, he said Europe has to get used to the fact that it has an aggressive anti-liberal power to its east, and now an aggressive anti-liberal superpower to its west. And I think that's a very, very dangerous situation in which Europe is in. But I would also like to highlight the transatlantic relationship is stronger and is much more than just government-to-government exchanges. It's also people exchanges, academic exchanges, civil society exchanges, local governments, city exchanges. So America is more than just Donald Trump in the White House. And that's why I still have a little bit of hope left.
Thank you. Milan.
Well, ultimately, this will be a big challenge for the European Union to survive, because you can see, and I will be more skeptical than Roderick, because I think in a way there is no way back, even if in 2029 there will be maybe a democratic president elected in the US. That this is a big rift. Now, with this administration, the basis of common values are no longer there. Look at what they are doing on Russia, Ukraine. They took Russia's side in a way, and what happens if in half a year they will recognize annexation of Crimea? Then we are left in Europe with the consequences. But let's also not lose from sight the nature of Trump administration. It's very much inward-looking. It's not isolationist, but inward-looking administration that tries to deal with some underlying problems with the U.S. society, the decay of the middle class, lack of industrial jobs. But it wants to sort of change the role of the U.S. both in the international system and in the global economy. But it's an administration and president that are very good in disrupting and throwing a wrecking ball on the problems, but not to reorganize them and solve them. So this on top of other tectonic shifts in the international system, this will be an era of disruption where the US, let's see the tariffs, where the US does not necessarily have a clear plan. They maybe have a sense of direction, but they're still reactive. They can be corrected by the markets. They can be corrected by, I don't know, their allies. When Trump says something on Gaza, what he wants to do, then he doesn't repeat it because it had a terrible reaction. So what we hear from on the positive side, this is still an administration that can be that is open to feedback, its own domestic feedback, but also with allies. But it basically is not that interested, wants to withdraw to Europe, maybe focus on Asia and China. But this is a different Europe now, essentially looking at the split West, where we are on our own. And I think this is what German Chancellor Merz understands, that Europe is now on our own. He is a perfect chancellor, given his transatlantic background and his also period in business when he was head of the supervisory board of BlackRock. So he's perfect in maybe leading this shift, but he's also imperfect in many other things that are challenging Europe. And I want to leave it at how will the single market, how will the European Union as a political project survive this period is really an open question. And it's not only because of Putin's Russia. And what I keep hearing in Berlin around me is that there will be now, this will be a different dynamics at the EU level. This will be a different European Council where leaders will look at each other more in as different coalitions of the willing on various, dealing with various fields or areas. Take defense as one of them, common defense, and where your EU will be more political union. So there will be no time to technicalities. And I think this is still a question, like if things are not, will be too difficult to organize at 27, where unity is not achievable, then groups of countries will look at multi-governmental principle and basically how to organize common policies and European solutions in a different way than so far. So this is at least thinking. Of course, at the end of the day, is domestic politics everywhere, and this is for this new German federal government is still too early, and for the chancellor to set policies. He's more of a chancellor of intentions and statements than of policies.
Thank you. Just to finish up with the transatlantic relationship, Miroslav, do you believe that at some point in time the transatlantic relations can be restored as we used to know it before, to a certain extent, once maybe the Trump administration is out, or are we seeing a permanent change in the quality of relations?
The question also may be whether we want them to be restored to the previous order we have been used to in the past maybe decades. Because what did this bring us? It brought us some kind of a false sense of security for so long that we have really big issues right now ahead of us concerning building up our defense capacities. That are very crucial in these times of rising tensions and of war in Ukraine. However, I definitely agree with you that the person of the American president and the upcoming ones is very important because of the large competencies that the American president has. So it is really dependent, the quality of transatlantic relationship really depends on who is sitting in the White House. Of course, this can get much better in the future after Trump leaves. So we definitely can hope for that, but we shouldn't really rely on this in the long term. It's just not in our best interest for Europe and for the European Union. Also, to build up a bit on what Mr. Nich was saying, I would say that definitely when we consider the survival of the EU, it's not just about our stance and relationship with USA, with Russia, with China. It's about our own capacity to keep some kind of internal unity, to be able to overcome the obstacles we face these days and these years, to protect our internal values, because that's the basis we are built on. It's not just about political unity, but also about some kind of rule of law and democracy, and of course also well-being of our citizens. So that is that. But also I agree that we will be seeing much more differentiated integration and some kind of a multi-speed Europe in the upcoming years. We can see already that in terms of foreign and security policy and in terms of building up European defense capacities, the coalition of willing is already here because of troublemakers such as Slovakia and Hungary these days.
Thank you. We'll come to that in a minute, but Milanič already mentioned Friedrich Merz, so let's look at him for a bit. What will be his influence on Europe, you think, Roderick? Because, you know, as always, there are big expectations from Germany when it comes to being able to steer Europe during the troubled times. Does he have the power, the capacity? Is he in the position to be the person who somehow enables the changes that we need to see in Europe? What do you think?
Well, I think it's too early to tell at this moment, but what we can say is that the new Trump administration is forcing Europe to grow up and be more independent and stand on its own 2 feet. And Germany, under the new government, is fortunately taking a bit of an acceleration role and helping Europe move towards that direction. And I would add also, largely thanks to the Green Party as well, because Germany, the German government, would not have been able to pass its constitutional amendment, allowing for much higher defense spending, allowing for a 500 billion infrastructure fund as well, if it wouldn't have been for the Green Party, which they needed for a constitutional amendment. So I think the picture is a little bit more nuanced. What we will see, however, I think, is that Friedrich Merz is also somebody with a very international, global outlook. And I expect the EU to become more independent, more integrated, and also more international. And we've seen that also with Foreign Minister Wadephul, who's already been on a whirlwind tour around the world, meeting with different partners. So the beginning elements are going in the right direction, I would argue.
Hey, Milan, what do you expect from the Trump-Merz meeting? Should we have some expectations? Do you believe there will be some, at least the least common denominator understanding on the big issues like Ukraine, not to mention Middle East?
Look, the Donald Trump presidency is as a president, he's very personal. So it's important how they get along. In a way, I am also seeing it as like in football, you have 2 halves. So this is a first meeting, is a first half, but the second half will be NATO summit. There is a lot of nervousness about NATO summit, which at present planning will be attended by Donald Trump, because it can go wrong. And it's a summit that it's not a must. It was planned before. People would wish now not to have it, rather to leave things on the ministers. But this will be a different NATO. So what Roderick, Miroslava were saying, yes, this is about European agency in many levels, including within NATO. At the same time, Donald Trump wants to show quick wins to his voters and domestic audiences. So there is now, I think, futile discussion about commitments to defense spending, so that the homeworks will be done quickly, and mostly US will benefit from increased defense spending. So at 5%, whatever, the percentages are thrown around. Now, let's not forget that Friedrich Merz has a huge task at home to restart the economy, to defend the political center vis-a-vis the rising far right, the AfD. He also has set up a federal government in a way which was not usual. It's very centralized setup on the CDU part, also on the part of SPD. So you have 2 sort of big chairmen, him and Lars Klingbeil as Minister of Finance and Vice Chancellor, that are being challenged within their own parties. And there was this vote for Friedrich Merz, which was a formality to be confirmed as Chancellor with the standing coalition, which he failed on the first time. We will see more of these tensions within the ruling coalition in Berlin. So he's not starting with a good spell. And also his style it's controversial. He's very executive. He doesn't have a very clear sort of power base within the CDU. He came from outside after he was away for a long time. So I think it's important how these things will set up. He also declares that he wants to be a foreign policy chancellor in Europe, and he wants to spend a lot of time on Europe. That's very good. That's what's needed. But it's partly about him. It's partly about his partners. The news from Poland is not good for him because he said that he wants to upgrade Poland on the level of France and have almost like a Weimar Triangle as a triumvirate in the EU on many issues. Now that we will have a split, we will have a sort of not even cohabitation in Poland, but a blocking president that will be even tougher than Duda. So things are, the landscape is much more difficult for Germany that still needs to not only restart its economy and reform, but also to start really spending on defense. It's one thing that Roderick mentioned, to lift up the constitutional limit on public spending. The other thing is to do it, to start spending in the right way, so that it will be translated into better capabilities of Bundeswehr and on the European level as well.
Thank you.
So I think, sorry, I drifted from your question. Yeah, important, the White House meeting. On the other hand, I think let's give Merz some time, and I keep hearing that important policy meetings here to have on should be shifted to September, October, when we can say more what to expect from him on Europa Politik, on EU policies.
Right. To bring Slovakia a little bit again in the picture, there has been this comments of Friedrich Merz that were widely covered here in Slovakia concerning, and they were already mentioned, that he basically said something along the lines that we need to address if countries like mainly Hungary, but possibly also Slovakia, are somehow sabotaging common European solutions or approaches to Russia, that this should be somehow addressed. Miroslav, do you believe this will have some, and of course not only this, but then came quite nasty comments from Slovak politicians to this. Do you think this will have some kind of further repercussions on and strains on bilateral relations between Germany and Slovakia?
Yes, the reaction of the coalition representatives in Slovakia has been quite quick and nasty comments. Yes, that's a good word to use. Definitely, this will not help the situation. We can see that the new chancellor is really getting into his new role, ready to act on this kind of problematic EU member state countries. He doesn't want to oversee them disrupting the European unity in places where we need to move on and where we need to move on quickly. So we can expect that the relationship between Slovakia and Germany will not look very well, especially as we see that the Prime Minister, as well as other representatives of the government, were not even trying to somehow diplomatically handle the entire situation and the comments that has been made by the Chancellor Merz in some kind of a TV show where he was. They continue in their kind of open communication of issues that should be handled behind closed doors, very openly in front of public, in front of media, and this is definitely not a way to have a kind of fruitful cooperation with our partners in Europe, and especially when it comes to Germany, which is a very important partner for Slovakia, also economy-wise. I don't see this as a good start.
Milan, have been these comments by Robert Fico, by Smer, by some Hlas, have they been noted in Germany, in German press?
No, very marginally. Okay. It was a response by Chancellor to a journalist question. He needed to respond in a tough way to look good. They don't represent policy. It was a wake-up call for Slovakia, maybe intended, I think if you want to, I also try to find out, like in my discussions with German diplomats dealing with Slovakia, when I tried to find out what was probably the message, in a nice way, they were saying, well, the message was the renewal of the Russia sanctions, sectoral sanctions in July will be a very important case for us, for European security. By blocking it, it would cause problems that Germany and others will have to spend the summer to solve. And if you do it, it will not be a business as usual anymore. But these like warnings so that you are warned, and you need to really sort of think twice what your national interest is in blocking. I think that could have been done in a different way. I don't think the Chancellor Merz went to the studio to pass a message because he had this in his talking point. I think it was more of a circumstantial thing, and therefore, I think reactions in Slovakia, as I could judge from the media and from the politicians, was because it was first time. Hungary cannot say that they I think they are used to it, right? So there was, I think, comparably little attention in Hungary. Slovakia was mentioned for the first time by the journalist and also by Merz. I think this is the question why. And to me, if I may say so, reactions at home was maybe understandable, but a little bit hysterical from both sides, both Prime Minister Fico and the camp, ruling camp, and also from the side of, I would say, government critical media.
Roderick, maybe from the Brussels perspective, how do you see the positioning of Slovakia in foreign policy debate? Is it visible? Is it a topic in the couloirs? What's the view from Brussels on Slovakia?
I would argue there is still a big question mark surrounding Slovakia. There is the sense that Slovakia can be put in the same camp as Orban from Hungary, but that when push comes to shove, Slovakia is not willing to play the same kind of hostage-taking and obstruction game that Orban is willing to take in the European Council. So maybe you could argue that Slovakia is a little bit of an Orban light. However, I'm not a Slovakia expert. I don't know what the situation is politically in Slovakia. But should the European Council constellation of power, should there be more far-right forces joining or extreme right forces joining in the European Council, be it because of elections in different member states taking place. We got lucky in Austria right now, but just today, the coalition government in the Netherlands fell apart. So there will be elections coming up in the Netherlands again. We saw what just happened with the presidential election in Poland. That will certainly have an impact as well on European policymaking. And you could have a growing hard right camp or anti-Ukraine, more pro-Russian, pro-imperialism camp, where you would have Hungary, Slovakia, and other players, and Slovakia might then be more comfortable in that growing mass to also play a more leading obstructionist role than it is right now. What we read today in the Politico playbook was that, in fact, the Slovakian Secret Service seems to have followed and spied on members of the European Parliament. And of course, all these kind of stories add to that growing question mark surrounding what's actually happening in Slovakia. And that's why I think it's also good that we're having discussions on this like here today.
Indeed, there have been actually 2 or 3 European Parliament fact-finding missions, and at least 2 of them have been met with, very hostile, I would say, comments. And indeed, it's been even covered on the European level. You mentioned that already, Milan, also Miroslava, that there might have come a point where the EU or the member states rather will need to opt for innovative ways of dealing or coming to crucial decisions. Maybe circling around the threats of veto by Slovakia and Hungary. Is this a trend that is necessary in your view, or is it to a degree a worrisome trend that should be approached with caution? Milan.
You mean at the EU level?
At EU level.
At the EU
At EU level,
course.
and yeah.
At the EU level, it's very risky. Therefore, nobody tried it. Not only under Merkel era, but now we know how close it was during the Euro crisis to maybe push Greece away from the Eurozone. But at some point, Schäuble, German foreign minister, was in favor. But it was such a risky move with the unclear repercussions that the leaders didn't go that far. Now, this is not about current week, current month. There is a sense, at least where I'm sitting in Berlin, that the European Union project is in an existential period, right? And in that existential period, where things tend to be reorganized, not in terms of new in terms of legislation or in terms of council decisions per se, but it tends to be reorganized around interest or around sort of different political setup. And this is where the leaders, heads of governments and states representing their countries can really change something fundamental because under time pressure and only now between Trump and Putin. So we are in this fragile moment for Europe. I think it's very important for not only Slovakia, for each member state, including especially the big ones with more responsibility to not only take decisions. These decisions by leaders are not done in vacuum. So you have different kind of debates, strategic debates or political debates around EU capitals. You are there in Bratislava to say whether it's only a harsh political debates among politicians or also some kind of a larger strategic debate, societal or foreign policy community debate, but this is the time to have it. You have individual moves by, for instance, Prime Minister Fico, then a different voices from the ruling coalition, then a different voice from the president. What I can say is that unlike earlier this year, unlike after first trip of Robert Fico to Moscow, which was in December partly not that noticed, this one was noticed by everybody. So you have a perception, and sometimes perceptions are more important than reality. Perception also in Germany starts to be, it's no longer only Orban Hungary, but it's this tandem. Now, I'm not happy about that as coming from Slovakia, because I can tell you that, and this is not also era for nuances, right? So people like to have simplified sort of solutions, headlines, but I can say that so far on Ukraine and EU policy, Fico government was careful not to block anything. Even when he had a quarrel with President Zelensky over gas flow, Slovakia was not blocking. It was always supporting EU membership for Ukraine. It was also sort of pointing out that it's providing electricity or a reverse gas flow, and that there is also the ammunition is flowing from Slovakia, also Slovak, but on commercial basis. So I think the old deal between Chancellor Scholz and Slovak Prime Minister Fico was Slovakia will have its own opinions on Russia and other things, but it will not block. Also on sanctions, it will not block.
Why do you think that is? Sorry, why do you think that is, that Fico shies away from blocking the decisions, even though his rhetorics are going exactly the opposite direction?
Because on the one hand, he had domestic audience that he needed to feed his own voters. On the other hand, he was a very pragmatic player on the EU level, because what would Slovakia get for disruption? Hungary is a disrupting player for years. It has been sort of opposing common statement. It was playing a different global game as well under Viktor Orban. What would be Slovak interest to block 25 on Ukraine so far? No, Slovak government under Robert Fico, with its prime minister responsible for it, Petr Kmec, wanted to be part of wanted to participate in the reconstruction of Ukraine. So yes, it kept its own opinion, so to speak, on the war and the causes, but it was not blocking the others. And this is a moment where I think, I don't know whether the Slovak Prime Minister is already decided whether he's going to block something or not, but his statements alongside Viktor Orban are moving in that way. So if you have a new German Chancellor, I can understand that he's nervous about it. And it's different, the last sentence. In the European Council, and Roderick knows this very more than me, in the European Council, at the end of the day, it's different dynamics to have one member state saying no or blocking, and to have more and to have a group. And it's not about qualified majority vote. It's about basically that it's no longer a problem of one dissenting member state is a group.
Right. Miroslav, there have been more or less political consensus in Slovakia for quite some time that the veto right in the EU is something that is very important to Slovakia as a small country. That is basically the leverage that we try to keep. In your view, is this really a national interest of Slovakia to keep the decision making in the EU on the consensus base, or should we allow sort of for the EU to be able to move forward by more use of qualified majority voting?
Yes, it has been on the table for some time already, and we've seen also before the previous European elections and the elections for the national parliament as well that when discussing the topic of getting rid of the veto power, it was not accepted neither by current coalition nor opposition parties. I would say maybe if Slovakia would one day accept broadening of qualified majority voting on the EU level for foreign and security policy issues, it could be helpful to prevent any future Slovak government with the, let's say, communication and priorities as the current one has to block us from being part of the common European solution. Or as we see today, we are not behind the table when negotiating the future security architecture. We are not wanting to be part of the coalition of the willing. We don't really want to participate in building up common European defense these days. If there would be qualified majority voting in terms of common foreign and security policy these days, it would be beneficial for Slovakia because we would not be threatened by our own government representatives voting against our own security interest. But we need to really underline that this is not on the table these days. The government is very openly opposing the very idea of losing the veto power, even if we are well aware, I would say, that using the veto and threatening to use the veto from the side of Slovakia is often related to unrelated political questions and issues than the ones that we are actually voting about, which we have observed in the past years in case of Hungary as well. But as it was rightly pointed out, in the matters that are really crucial for the EU right now these days, in terms of, let's say, the anti-Russian sanctions, we are still in line with the European mainstream. We know where our place is currently. It's more about the very bad kind of rhetorics that the government is using, but when it comes to voting, we are still on the same page as our partners.
Roderick, do you believe that the formation of coalitions of the willing is a way forward for the EU, or is it something risky for the European project?
Look, the EU has a variety of different integration formats, right? It has Schengen, it has the Eurozone, it has PESCO. So it's nothing new that there are different types of integration. We have the European political community, which is outside the EU. and nothing is set in stone. Do I think the coalition of the willing is an important format in the current times that we're living in when it comes down to hard security? Absolutely. It brings together really important security actors in Europe, such as the UK, such as Turkey. And we need to find a format that does not get hijacked by the power of one, which is Hungary, or where what's discussed is immediately telegraphed back to Moscow or to Beijing so that they know what's happening. So I see the coalition of the willing format as a, let's say, something that's functional and that's pragmatic. Do we need to make sure that it's aligned with the EU or coordinated with EU policy? Absolutely, sure. It should not undermine the EU, and it should not work in opposition to the EU. We need to make sure it's aligned, but it is a very important format in that regard. And that I would also highlight that the EU is actually doing a lot when it comes to hard security. We are seeing more money being put into the defense industry, be it via the use of cohesion funds or be it via the new SAFE instrument. There is all these many acronyms, you know, EDIP and EDIS, building up a European industrial base for the defense industry and creating a common procurement market, because, you know, it doesn't make sense to have 25, 26 different types of tanks when you can streamline it down to 3. We need to make sure, and this is something that Milan said at the beginning as well, it's not just about being able to spend the money, but it's also about how we spend the money, making sure we get enough bang for our buck. But to come back to the original question, yes, I think the coalition of the willing is an important format because unfortunately the EU in the current situation it is in cannot deal with such hard security defense related issue. It doesn't have important players on board such as Turkey and the UK and others, and it does not necessarily have the remit either.
Okay, we have mentioned the hard security, so let's look at the issue a little bit more. What do you feel are the most promising projects that the EU is currently launching in the area of the hard security that have the potential to yield results in a relatively short or medium term timeline that can significantly improve Europe's resilience in terms of security? Milan.
I think we are in the construction phase. You have European Commission announcing new initiative almost every month. It's clear priority for this Commission, along with migration, energy, or climate adjustment. I think it's too early. Things are being developed, and yet you have a political setup in flux. So for instance, what's the impact of Poles electing this president? One of the impacts might be that so far the Tusk government was very favorable, actually supporting European defense on behalf of Poland, clearly saying that there is no other way. Whereas the Law and Justice Party and the president-elect see it as a betrayal of Polish interests, as a step away from the US, and so on and so on. And if it was under previous PiS government, actually, that Poland decided to throw a lot of money on new tanks, on new capabilities, but they were buying partly for good reason because they were available. Their main partners were the US and South Korea. So it will be more complicated to organize it. Again, where this puts Germany with the member state, both in NATO and EU, with the largest national resources now, I think until yesterday, the big question, for instance, in bilateral relations between Warsaw and Berlin was some kind of a anti-missile shield on the eastern flank that would protect Poland, and Germany would be able to partly finance it. And then there was a question who would deliver it. By the way, as far as I understand, Slovakia is still involved in these discussions. So on the one hand, Ministry of Defense Kalinia goes to Poland, meets with his counterpart, and then says something obnoxious at the press conference, and that's the attention. On the other hand, I hear that on practical issues and capabilities, Polish-Slovak cooperation is quite good. So I don't know, in this crazy era, we can discuss it in more like what to expect and what would be the Slovak interest. I would wish that under this government, Slovakia still gets itself engaged in as many common European projects as possible and does not do something stupid, sorry to say so, on a big ticket issues, as where it would simply show that it has not only different strategic reading of the situation, but that it is willing to ally with Moscow on something. Because this can have, then you have a switchboard now, you switch and this can be very difficult to repair even under different government if there are snap elections in Slovakia.
Miroslav, what do you see when looking on the Slovak positions to the European issues, European policies? What is the reaction or the input of current Slovak government into these new defense building initiatives? Can we discern some?
Well, we definitely, when we look at the Slovak government, we definitely see they continue their view of how we can help to end the war against Ukraine. Since they took power in October 2023, they continue to push the agenda of not wanting to help in a military way, but only humanitarian and economic one. I would say that the current initiatives that are just starting and concerning the buildup of European defense and the capacities are really a great opportunity for Slovakia for the upcoming years to be part of them, to maybe invest and broaden our defense sector as well, to help our defense companies to get bigger, to create working position and labor positions, especially in times when we see that, for example, the automotive industry is not keeping its strength and will decline in the upcoming years. We can be a country, as we are on the borders with Ukraine, we can be the country that will in the upcoming years also channel further support and help with the reconstruction of Ukraine after the war ends. So it really is a great opportunity for Slovakia, and we should be part of the initiatives that are currently being open. As Mr. Nič rightly pointed out, that the priority of the Commission is set really straight in these matters. And we can also see that there will be a lot of finances and a lot of money that will be streamlined into European defense. So that would be very interesting for Slovakia. But I would maybe add just one thing. When we see the discussion on the future of European defense, we focus a lot on the financial side, on the money that is being poured in, whether it's intent to attract private capital, whether it's adjustment of the upcoming multi-annual financial framework, maybe at the expense of cohesion policy even, or just simply increasing defense spending per countries, whatever we name. We should also be focusing on other factors that are really important and crucial in the whole debate, which is also personnel that will be needed in the production, personnel that will be needed in the European armies and military, and maybe things such as lessening bureaucratic and other obstacles for defense companies, as well as we know that this kind of defense sector has really like a longer reaction time when it comes to their capacity to plan. So we need to be very clear about our plans, whether they are on the EU level or potentially Slovak level, for the defense companies to be actually able to react on time and really as soon as possible, I can say.
Okay, on one hand, we have the the defense capabilities of Europe that are being constructed. But on the other hand, there is the fate of Ukraine that is still in the middle of the war, even though some negotiations have already started. What should be the EU's role in Ukraine? Also, if we take into account that the US might actually withdraw from supporting Ukraine, maybe altogether, maybe partly, maybe altogether. So can Europe fill in the void that might arise, and will it be enough? Roderick.
First of all, I think we should all hope that the US does not abandon Ukraine, and we should do what we can or what's in our power to make sure the United States and Trump in particular stays engaged with Ukraine. That being said, I think the EU has a very important role to play and shouldn't underestimate the cards that it actually has in its hand. The EU is home to a lot of the large chunk of Russia's frozen assets. That is a card that the EU has and that it can play. The EU has a membership perspective put forth Ukraine. The EU is able to get engaged when it comes to reconstruction funds. The EU has passed a 17th round of sanctions on Russia. So the EU can be an actor with regards to Ukraine and must not necessarily be only a bystander looking at what whatever Trump decides with regards to Ukraine. Absent of NATO membership, I think it's really important that there are security guarantees for Ukraine in the sense of arming Ukraine to the teeth. Multi-year, multi-billion commitments allowing Ukraine to have a kind of porcupine strategy where if Russia were to attack again, it could immediately resist. I'm also in favor of a reassurance force, which is obviously under discussions under the coalitions of the willing format. I think that is the right format for it. And of course, it's also would be in line with the Ukrainian security compact that has been developed by the former NATO Secretary General Rasmussen and with the President's Office of Ukraine as well, which also foresees arming Ukraine to the teeth, but also having snapback sanctions in place. So should Russia attack again, that immediately you have a restoration of all the sanctions packages that the EU had. And of course, there's a whole range of bilateral and multilateral security guarantees as well. France has one with Ukraine. The United Kingdom has them with Ukraine. I believe Germany has them as well. And in the meantime, what we need to do is continue our support for Ukraine and accelerate Ukraine's integration also in our own European defense industry, because we can actually benefit from Ukrainian experience, from the experience of Ukraine on the battlefield, from Ukrainian technologies when it comes to drone production. This is something that can help us. I mean, we saw the attack a couple of days ago, Operation Spiderweb, how they managed with the hidden drones in the trucks to suddenly shake the third pillar of Russia's nuclear armed or nuclear force. That was the equivalent to a Pearl Harbor. That's something that we need to learn from as well. So integrating Ukraine into our defense markets is also in our own benefit.
The security of Ukraine is certainly very much linked to the security of Europe as a whole. Milan, what's your view on the security guarantees that the European Union should be advocating for when it comes to Ukraine and any kind of possible solution?
It's very tricky to discuss guarantees. I understand for Ukrainians this is absolutely the key, and it was not NATO membership, as they invested a lot of diplomatic efforts into some kind of a promise of NATO membership as a security guarantee. It was I think long-term not viable because there were always some member states against it, including the one from where I'm speaking, not only under Angela Merkel. So then Kiev decided to go into some kind of a bilateral security guarantees with defense arrangements, treaties. Then you have also EU accession. So I think it will always be a combination of things. I think at the end of the day, the big question important for Slovakia's security as well is whether the 80% of Ukraine or whatever territory government in Kiev will control is sustainable as a functioning state in the long run and with defensible borders. There is no, I think, naivete to think that Ukraine can recover the occupied territories now. But I think the principles upon which the new arrangement, the new settlement will be organized will be new principles for European security and borders and so on and so on. Other players, including in the region that I'm dealing with the most now, which is the Western Balkans with its unresolved conflicts, will take this as a new game, as a new rules, or lack of rules, and will move. So this is not, Ukraine is the centerpiece in a much larger sort of scale, where our neighborhood as the EU, but also at Slovakia is very fragile now. So I think, again, to come back to, I think what's going on now in terms of preparing some common decisions at the EU level, I would hope that the government of Robert Fico will not see as the national interest of Slovak Republic, even if they have different opinions or tactics, to, let's say, block the decision of others, 25, on, let's say, frozen Russian assets or renewal of sanctions. And this will, by the way, this will become increasingly difficult as we go. If Czech Republic will have a different government, there will be, again, more understanding about these leaders. So it will be more difficult to organize European politics, which will be more fragmented, but still that's not the way, and there's still negotiations with the EU budget, which will be very different. I think it's not the reason to take one element around Ukraine and to say, I think the trick that Robert Fico does is that he tweaks different opinion. I mean, everybody can have different opinion, prime ministers can have different opinion, from a decision in the European system, in the EU system, of sort of blocking European solutions, which he doesn't like discussion about that. I think this is what will be down the road in the coming weeks, assuming that there will be no big disruption from NATO summit or somewhere else, which will change the whole debate.
Right. There's also the big question of the possible Ukraine's accession to the EU. Interestingly enough, this is something that Robert Fico is saying that he supports. Even some official materials have been produced by this government that basically argue in favor of supporting and helping Ukraine's accession to the EU. Miroslava, do you think that this is something that will hold politically also in the future, given that part of the electorate of current coalition, of course, is not in favor of Ukraine's EU accession? Also, we've seen lately that the Czech Republic, which is supporting, again, there have been some poll released saying that majority of Czech citizens do not support the EU accession of Ukraine. How do you see this playing out?
I don't really see the government changing its stance on the future of Ukraine in the EU anytime soon. I think the Prime Minister is very good and experienced in setting up the narrative, including his followers or supporters. So once it would come into question and it would be on the program of the day, I believe he would explain this this issue and enlargement of the EU when it would come to Ukraine. A different situation would be if there would be preliminary parliamentary elections in Slovakia, because we know that we have been past this past winter, we've been through a governmental crisis in Slovakia. We see that the cooperation between the three coalition parties is not ideal. They have various disputes pretty much every day or at least weekly on different issues. So in case of any preliminary elections, there is definitely a threat that Smer party could cooperate in coalition with a more extreme or far-right party, and that could endanger also Slovak position towards the integration of Ukraine to the EU, potentially. To also react on the previous speaker, I would maybe add, when we are talking about Slovakia being in unity with the EU steps concerning the anti-Russian sanctions and EU policy towards Russia these days, I would say that so far, yes, it's true, we didn't use the veto to stop the common EU action in this regard. But I see potentially the energy sources diversification and the current plans of the EU to get rid of our dependency on Russian energy sources as an issue that could endanger the Slovak position and support when it comes to voting and supporting this, because the Prime Minister is very open and critical about Slovakia potentially having to get rid of its energy ties with Russia.
Thank you. I don't know, Milan, do you wanted to comment?
Yes, I think it was always sanctions, yes, but don't touch, don't prevent us from import oil and gas via pipelines. So there were these exceptions, but now the exceptions are up. And you have not only European Commission, but majority of member state governments seeing differently the dependence or any kind of sort of energy flows from Russia as not reliable, as misused by politics. And basically, Robert Fico says, I don't care. I still want, I don't see Russian energy as strategically difficult or unreliable. So he would still, although he prepared some other tricks with other gas, but I think the moment of truth will be whether the Commission will push both Bratislava and Budapest to sort of move out of, or to withdraw them the exception and the transition period. Now on Ukraine, the more the accession talks will be growing, the more I think it will be difficult for neighboring states, because you will have opening of the markets for agricultural products, I don't know, transport and so on. So it will be difficult to argue. Look at Poland, where also position of Poland might change. This is what the presidential campaign saw, where Nawrocki supported directly some protests by Polish truck drivers and others. It's a difficult thing because normally with such a big country joining coming closer with the special trade agreements to support Ukrainian economy, normally you would protect your own industry and you would have transition periods. But this is about hard arguing and negotiating in Brussels. The problem, I think, for Slovakia is weakening of its position in Brussels or in the EU, lack of allies, lack of credibility, then to argue on your economic or other interests, which there will be growing and more difficult on Ukraine. And let's not also forget that we have shifts of public opinion even in Austria. Government is very pro-enlargement. Public opinion, also right-wing party FPÖ that won elections, is very much against enlargement. Public sentiment in Vienna is becoming anti-enlargement. So it's not only us. But again, with Robert Fico going to Moscow, Slovakia will be more visible and much more easily, targeted as a problem kid in this.
We have a few more minutes left, and I would like to address one more issue, and that is all these hard security measures, building internal capacities, helping Ukraine, will necessarily drain resources, financial, others, and it will necessarily bring with it a sort of political backlash, because it might come at an expense of let's call it human security, welfare. Actually, I heard a term being used at another conference just last week, where a speaker said, "Okay, we had a welfare state, now it'll be warfare state. Let's prepare for a warfare state." So, my questions to you all basically would be how to make sure that this push towards bigger resilience towards defense capacities, which we all will agree is very necessarily crucial and potentially existential, but many people might not see it as well, might not see the urgency behind it, the geopolitical context. So how would you, I know it's $1 million question, but how would you advise politicians to still sell it in a way? And yeah. Roderick.
I thought Milan was going to go first because he still got his mic available. Look, this is, like you said, $1 million question. And the problem is simply, and this is something that I said in my introduction as well, we have 3 of our pillars that are being, that are changing. The energy relationship that we had, where we were relying on Russia. Our prosperity, where we're relying on an international trading system and also on the big Chinese market to constantly suck up our products, and the security system. And all 3 are changing, and Europe needs to deal with all 3. Is hard security important? Is it a priority right now? Absolutely, but that doesn't mean there aren't other priorities that we mustn't neglect. The economic dimension is incredibly crucial. The social dimension is incredibly crucial. If you ask, for example, the major European cities, what's your biggest issue? It's the housing crisis. It's the housing prices. If you ask average citizens, it's the cost of living. For many, it's also climate change and the loss of biodiversity. These are all issues that we have to deal with. And that's why one of the things that was very successful for the incoming government in Germany, also thanks to the support of the Greens, is that when they had their constitutional amendment and increased their defense spending, it wasn't just a focus on increasing the defense spending. It was also focused on investing massively in German infrastructure, in railroads, in schools, in education, housing, and so forth. Also 100 billion in the climate transformation fund. Mario Draghi said it in his report last year. We're at a point where if we don't take action, we will either have to compromise our welfare, our environment, or our freedom. So Europe has to take action on its economy as well. Unfortunately, I see a trend where the action it's trying to take is to deregulate, because that's the quickest short-term way to boost competitiveness. So all these simplification drives and omnibus drives, we're seeing a kind of backlash and rollback on the European Green Deal. I would argue that is threatening European competitiveness, actually, in the medium to long term, because we need to become more efficient. We need to work on the green transformation. If we don't do it, others like China, like the United States, will eat our lunch in this area. So focus on hard security, yes, but obviously there's other priorities that we need to take care of as well.
Thank you. Milan?
Well, will Miroslava jump in? I was always, if you have a good answer, go first.
Up to you. I definitely agree. It is not an easy question to respond to, but I would say that maybe the main line for politicians to communicate these kind of issues should be that existential threat that is currently real. We can see what's happening in Ukrainian soil. We can see the attacks on children, on hospitals, on people living their lives across Ukraine in various cities is in danger. And if we use these images and explain that existential threat is actually potentially going to cross borders in the upcoming years to our countries, this should and has to always come first before any kind of comfort that people nowadays have. Of course, it's not going to be, it has to be on the expense of something. Yes, I understand also when people are living from day to day or month to month, they don't really see the global issues and the global politics as something that is on the first, how to say it, on the first most priority for them. But a combatant politician should be able to somehow explain the prioritization of building our European security architecture and defense capabilities. The problem I see nowadays is that Slovak government and also governments in maybe other countries, or at least part of the political scene in other countries, is not going to be really willing to explain this. So that's where I see the issues with maybe the public opinion in the future.
If I may, I would say that renewal of industrial basis for defense industry means also new jobs. There is no other way. And by the way, discussion about next 3 or 4 years and global security would be short-sighted if not mentioning a real possibility, potential for China trying to take over Taiwan by force. So this is much more conflict-prone world. We need to improve our defense capabilities so that people feel more secure. And it means also sort of shifting some, we are still industrial, so Slovakia is still industrial economy. It means that some of its industry can be revived through more defense production. And second thing is, this is not possible to solve by member states alone. You need to look at not only pool resources and joint procurement, but also at European solutions and also funding at EU level. So if the Commission is able to propose a joint fund at 150 billion euros, such a firepower is not possible elsewhere. Slovak industries should compete and qualify. I think this is the way to go, and you can make a cause for Europe by sort of meeting the challenge. But again, if there is a snap elections, there will be a lot of maybe domestic sort of cleavages and discussions and narratives clashing on this, and Ukraine and misuse of these essentially policy arguments. And maybe there is a role of think tanks and media to do some corrections, and also to always stress that we are a member of the EU and NATO, and some of the solutions are with allies.
Thank you very much. I mean, we in the media will try to be part of the debate. I mean, we tackled today a broad spectrum of issues. So thank you very much for participating. Thank you to Roderick Keferpütz, to Miroslava Pisklova, and to Milan Nič for being part of this discussion. I would like to also thank Heinrich Böll Stiftung, the office in Prague, for cooperating with us on this debate. We will have another debate in the cooperation with your office in autumn, focused more on rule of law issues, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, thanks everybody for watching, for following, and yeah, we'll be back with more interesting debates and events. Thank you very much.